So, if you've watched any of my previous videos, you've probably seen that I like to use tarot cards as a way of looking at the symbolism behind memes and behind various social occurrences and phenomena. So I thought that I would do a video explaining just a few of the basics of tarot cards and their symbolism and how to get to know what they mean in a deeper way. So, stick around. I'm going to be reading a bit from Crowley's book on the Thoth tarot cards, and then from an essay by Jung, which will help illustrate some of Crowley's ideas even further. So I find a lot of people are confused about what the tarot cards really are doing and what kind of an operation is it. And I think at its essence, we are looking at an elemental operation. We have the interplays of opposite elements. We have fire and water, and earth and air. Now, these four, of course, indicate the nature of the zodiac and of generally the forces at play. Each of the major arcana represents an elemental, zodiacal, or planetary force. And these are the 12 which are zodiacal. We're looking at a series of zodiac signs and planetary cards. So the interplay of these is clear if you have daily astrology type of apps and stuff. I know a lot of people like to use those now, but you can see the way that a planet is influenced through the zodiac, and even further, how the nature of the zodiac sign is influenced by its elemental position. So you kind of have this big four of the elementals, which determine the emotionality, the attitude, the style. The majors, which are really the main forces that come out of these elements, and the planets, which are these overwhelming personalities that are influencing the world through these zodiacal forms. So you might notice I'm referring to the cards as essentially entities, or as essentially energetic forms, archetypes. And this is how I read the cards. I read the cards as archetypal symbols, not as some kind of psychic tool so much, but rather as a means of allowing the collective unconscious and the personal unconscious to project itself onto a beautiful symbolic mirror. These cards function as a way of allowing the unconscious to see itself. You know, they refer to psychoanalysis as a dyadic relationship because one person cannot look at themselves, especially not clearly. Art is often the only way that we can really analyze ourselves. I know when I used to make films, I would make it totally unconscious. I'd just, poop it out. And then I would sort through it and understand what I'd just done. I think tarot cards are essentially this form of poop. You shuffle them and you lay it out. It's important to not give too much of this kind of New Age sanctity to the cards. The cards are at their essence yours, an extension of you. Just as the archetypes only get to know themselves through you and through the people around you, they are never truly external, never truly other. They're perceived that way, but it's important to retain a degree of understanding and strength without giving yourself over to unknowable forces. And I see that as the real danger in the New Age. So to illustrate this concept of the personal tarot and personal knowledge of the archetypes, I'm going to read a bit from Crowley's essay within the Book of Thoth, The Behavior of the Tarot. Here he says, "Consider the analogy of a debutante at her coming out ball. She's introduced to 78 grown people. Assuming her to be a particularly intelligent girl with a very high social education, she may know all about the position and general characteristics of these people. This, however, will not imply real knowledge of any one of them. She will have no means of saying how any one will react to her. At most, she can know only a few facts from which deductions may be made. It is unlikely, for example, that the VC will hide in a cellar if somebody thinks that there is a burglar in the house. It is improbable that the bishop will indulge in the more blatant types of blasphemy. The position of the student of the tarot is very similar. In this essay, and in these designs, is given an analysis of the general character of each card, but he cannot reach any true appreciation of them without observing their behavior over a long period. He can only come to an efficient understanding of the tarot through experience. It will not be sufficient for him to intensify his studies of the cards as objective things. He must use them. He must live with them. They too must live with him. A card is not isolated from its fellows. The reactions of the cards, their interplay with each other, must be built into the very life of the student. How is he to use them? How is he to blend their life with his? The ideal way is that of contemplation. And he goes on to say that that's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult for someone uninitiated in the Ordo Templi Orientis' system, or the AA's system, to have any grasp of how to meditate and reflect on the meaning and the personality of these cards. They're immediately mystifying. That's what gives them their effectiveness, I find. I've talked before about how memes are sufficiently strange, sufficiently esoteric, unassailable from the rational mind, and that is what gives them their mass effectiveness. It's very difficult to crack their case. The tarot cards are the same way. It's like a series of ancient memes that have been given to you, and you have to analyze them. You have to find, what did these mean 1,000 years ago? What do they mean today? And how do I even begin to understand them? In Jung's essay, The Concept of the Collective Unconscious, he begins to tell us about a very important concept which Jung himself utilized to write the Red Book and to explore his own collective unconscious and to gain knowledge of the archetypes. It sounds a lot like Odin hanging, doesn't it? Suffering and going into the unconscious to return with runes, to return with magic. So, here we see what he has to say. Another source for the materials we need is to be found in active imagination. By this I mean a sequence of fantasies produced by deliberate concentration. I have found that the existence of unrealized unconscious fantasies increases the frequency and intensity of dreams, and that when these fantasies are made conscious, the dreams change their character and become weaker and less frequent. From this I have drawn the conclusion that dreams often contain fantasies which want to become conscious. The sources of dreams are often repressed instincts, which have a natural tendency to influence the conscious mind. In cases of this sort, the patient is simply given the task of contemplating any one fragment of fantasy that seems significant to him, a chance idea perhaps, or something he has become conscious of in a dream, until its context becomes visible. That is to say, the relevant associative material in which it is embedded. It is not a question of the free association recommended by Freud for the purpose of dream analysis, but of elaborating the fantasy by observing the further fantasy material that adds itself to the fragment in a natural manner. So we're getting the very same suggestion from Jung, which is that we need massive, deliberate concentration upon fragments of fantasies. And the deck itself is perhaps the microcosm of the fantasy, as many of the people who have studied the tarot describe. This is essentially a look at all of the natural forms and laws at work. The question is how the cards are fragments. And there's a word that I love when it's referring to the tarot, and that is that of a technology, which is an applied science. Now, this is the gay science. This is the great science of magic and of nature. And here we have all of the necessary pieces, all of the chemicals necessary for the great art. Eliphas Levi says as much, that a prisoner, having no other book but the tarot cards, after 4 years will know more than anybody else if he knows how to study them. That he will be able to gain understanding of any system of knowledge utilizing this form. We really do need to examine closely the relation of ourselves to these fragments of fantasy, to these fragments of nature. How difficult it is, how mystifying the shapes, the caricatures, the colors all are. They immediately shock us, and this is why they're so useful for fortune telling. Somebody who knows what they mean puts them in front of somebody who doesn't, and they're immediately put into shock. The cards are so beautiful. The cards are so strange. What do they mean? And when somebody effortlessly reads through them, just like a book, because they are in fact a language that is spoken by the gay scientist, they're able to grasp it. I find myself speaking in these kind of magical words rather than the usual Jungian or Freudian language that I use, but make no mistake, I'm really just using the tongue that is already established for them. My thoughts on the tarot are almost entirely scientific in nature, which is that these are a means of understanding our absolutely objective personal and collective unconsciouses. It is not a matter of any psychic influence. But having that been said, we need to look at these cards as a tendril of the uncanny, a tendril of synchronicity. These cards function as a kind of engine, a production machine of synchronicities. You will find, even if you don't believe in the cards, that their meanings will relate to yourself and to those around you, without having known anything about the situations beforehand. The cards have a funny way of always hitting the nail on the head, just like dreams. You think they might be meaningless and the stuff of the occult, and it's important to remember that. A lot of what Freud was paying attention to was considered occult junk. So I think it's important to not just throw out occult junk. We need to see it as very useful. You know, the Ouija board was designed by psychoanalysts as a means of understanding the unconscious. Perhaps we'll do an episode on that next. We'll communicate with the spirits of the dead, which Freud knew were, in fact, elements of our personal unconscious mind coming to the fore. How is it that we always are able to call the unconscious a demon or a ghost, or an angel or a spirit, or Jesus taking the wheel? We are always able to misunderstand the influence of our own unconscious minds as that of being something divine. The true reality is that divinity is the unconscious. I hope you've enjoyed what I've had to say, a little bit. And if you have any questions or you want a reading, be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and we will absolutely get back to you. So, I hope you've enjoyed, and remember, tarot cards are memes, and memes matter.